Warning, there will be spoilers on this show. Man's food turning to eat man.
I'm Dan Lawson, and I'm your host.
I'm Scott Cornell, and I'm your host.
This is a scary movie review.
So this week, our movie is Attack of the Killer Donuts.
A beautiful work of art.
A work of art. That's a good way to put it. This movie instantly reminds me, just because of the name, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Now, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes was the only movie that was credited as influence, but having watched it, I think this is the second or third time. I think it's at least the third time that I watched it. To me, it really has a heavy influence of Reanimator.
Yes.
And it's just kind of, to me, it's more Reanimator than it is Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And I didn't really notice until this last time that I watched it. I think it has a heavy Gremlins influence when the one donut is making that chirpy sound, which the chirpy sound to me sounds like the Gremlins when they were multiplying.
Mm-hmm.
And he's bouncing on the edge of the fryer and they're shooting the donuts out of the fryer.
Yep.
Reminds me of when Stripe was dumping all of the Gremlins into the water and they were all popping out.
Yeah, he kept hitting that button, which was what, the eject button or something?
I guess. I don't know what was going on because I don't run a deep fryer, but
You've never made donuts
I've made donuts in my kitchen. I made donuts in my kitchen, but that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, that whole scene reminded me of the Gremlins.
You mentioned it reminding you of Reanimator, which was from 1985, a movie where Herbert West tries to bring back his dead professor, and then it turns into almost a zombie film.
Yeah.
It's been forever since I've seen it. Maybe that's something we throw on this podcast eventually. It's a little mainstream, but it was also a low budget for the time.
Reanimator is a horror classic. Reanimator needs to be talked about in general.
It does. I remember that being one of the first scary movies I'd seen as a kid, recommended by my father.
Reanimator was my first horror film.
It's going to have a tribute at some point in this podcast.
I believe I was 11 years old.
Long time ago. All right, so Attack of the Killer Donuts was released in 2016. It's classified as an action comedy horror film, which I think it has elements of all of those.
Absolutely.
It was directed by Scott Wheeler. No rating, so it hasn't been rated.
It has not been rated.
Definitely put it at an R rating.
I would put it at an R rating.
So there's a lot of cursing and sexual references. This thing was like sexually charged, man.
It was very sexually charged, which, I mean, you get with a lot of horror movies, but the violence was definitely there as well.
Yeah. And interesting fact, the runtime on the version that we both watched, which is also on Amazon Prime, I don't know how long it'll be on Prime, so I don't want to put that out there. You might have to find it other ways through whatever subscription base you have. But the version we watched was 85 minutes long. There's a reference to another version of 98 minutes, but I could not find that anywhere to watch.
The original?
Yeah. So there's just a little tidbit when you watch it. You might be watching an extended cut or a director's version. Maybe there's a DVD out there with this longer version on it, but we'll be talking about the 85-minute version in this podcast. In a nutshell, this movie is a scientist trying to reanimate the dead, and it goes wrong.
It always goes wrong.
Yeah, it's never gone right. It'd be happy movies then.
Right. One thing I really enjoyed about this movie is we've talked several times over the last couple of movies that we covered about practical effects. I'm a huge fan of practical effects, and this movie did have it. It did have some great claymation kind of donuts, but it was a CG nightmare.
Yes.
The CG, and it's in your face.
Yeah, those donuts are very not well blended into the scene.
Yeah. Which kind of really added to the almost uncomfortableness of, at one point, the main character says, "We're about to be snacks for our snacks."
Yep. This all starts off with Johnny working with an old middle school friend, Michelle, at a donut place called Dandy's Donuts. Dandy's Donuts is this run-down, hole-in-the-wall kind of grungy donut shop.
Why is it in these lower budget movies, these little stores, these little mom and pops, they're always so dirty?
Yeah. And the creeper guy that just sits there, I guess he's not a creeper, but he's not really a defined character. The guy that sits in the shop all day and just hangs out.
Yeah.
Like the guy at the end that in the explosion, he's still alive somehow, but he's just this extra character. I don't even think he's named at all during the movie.
No, you want him to be something. He seems like he's going to pull out some significance at some point, and it's coming, but it never actually comes. He's just always sort of there.
Yeah, I thought he was going to be the hero. Like
Yeah.
at the end, I'm waiting for him to do something extravagant. He's just there. The manager or store owner, Cliff, is also an interesting guy. Kind of, again, another creeper. Like there's a lot of these sexual undertones of this movie, and he's this, at one point, he's looking for a mail order bride, it seems like. He says some kind of reference, and then he's getting on his computer.
Yeah, he's clearly getting ready.
Yeah. And then the donuts are making all that sound out there, and he's buttoning up his pants, and he comes out and gets murdered. But that he was an interesting guy. Your typical really bad boss that doesn't know how to manage people and just kind of bad habits. At one point, he drinks from the cooler, the drink cooler, puts his drink back for a customer to purchase.
Yeah, that was terrible.
Yeah, they really paint him in a not so good light. He reminds me of Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, if anybody knows that character. He's just a grungy guy. And one fun thing they do with Cliff is his toupee or his hairpiece.
Is always some sort of comical situation.
Something happens with it. It gets bumped around and it always looks like a hot mess.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that with him. Michelle and Johnny have an interesting relationship where they've kind of known each other a long time, and Johnny's in love with this other girl, Veronica, which he believes he has this great, amazing relationship with. But in reality, she's just using him for his money. And Johnny's mom at the beginning kind of hints to that too. Like, why don't you date this nice Michelle girl? Veronica just wants you for your money, or just wants money. She's high maintenance, kind of is what she's hinting at.
Right.
And Johnny says to his mom, Veronica is just being hot. Where Michelle, she's a friend from grade school. So that's how he views both these characters until as the plot develops, you kind of get to know Veronica more, and Johnny gets to kind of discover who Veronica really is as the movie goes on. And he becomes enlightened and really sees how Veronica's using him and abusing him for his money. And he ends up leaving her. I thought something was interesting. As he was driving away, she says, "Aren't you going to say anything kind of about the relationship or her cheating on him?" And he doesn't say anything.
Yeah, she's just completely just like belittles him and how dumb he is and how he fell for all this. And then she still expects something more from him.
I like that part.
And he just leaves.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. It really had that whole triangle, really had that 80s kind of after school special love interest feel to it for me.
There's another character that was briefly introduced, which was Michelle's brother dropping her off at work, talking about Michelle was supposed to fix the laptop before she left for work or at some certain point in the day, and she had not done it. And his appearance, I didn't understand that part really much, like what his value was.
It kind of felt like that whole situation was really building up towards Michelle's computer skills,
which only got used for 1 minute.
She opens up Johnny's laptop and she does a couple things and his laptop's fixed. And then computers are never relevant in any way for anything for the entire rest of the movie. But that whole scene in the car with her brother really built up how good she was with computers and how important that was. And it was very, very significant. It felt like it was very significant that she was a computer genius. And this was this side gig that she had that needed to have some sort of relevance and was really never mentioned again.
Never. Yeah, I thought, oh, she's going to save the day with her computer skills or something. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
Luther, Uncle Luther, the mad scientist, living in Johnny's basement?
Yeah, sister.
Yeah. So I was just trying to picture this family dynamic because There's a lot of odd things. I don't feel like they have a close relationship as a family because Uncle Luther at one point doesn't recognize Howard, the best friend of Johnny,
Who's there every single day having dinner, and we find out an affair
yes,
with Johnny's mom.
which again is such a weird added storyline to this movie.
Yeah.
Like at some point, Howard goes over there to his mom's house. His mom opens the door. She's in like a dress, like kind of beautiful looking. Howard goes in and then leaves the next scene or whatever. He leaves.
He stumbles out and he's kind of,
He's in a happy mood.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit maybe disoriented, maybe a little bit too happy.
To me, all these kids are in high school. Like, to me, the age of all these characters, and they don't really explain that, how old anybody's supposed to be. But to me, I feel like they're kind of like high school love, like, or maybe right into college, maybe that age group.
Yeah.
But it doesn't explain that. And the fact he's still living at home, he's supposed to be cutting the grass, kind of like these high school tasks,
Right.
A child living at home still. I had the feeling that it was at high school, and maybe that's why I'm thinking he was on a bicycle leaving the scene. But to me, that was also just it was odd. Like they added a lot of odd things like that.
There were a lot of story fillers that you wanted to be something.
Yeah.
Never was.
They grew into nothing. The neighbors with the binoculars of Mrs. S, they're kind of spying on that whole scene. Or they're spying on the kids breaking into the house to check on Mrs. S. But they added this weird element of like S&M and bondage, that these people are into some kinky stuff. I found that very odd. Like it didn't have any plot add. But I guess that's what this is. It's all just a bunch of craziness thrown into a bucket.
There's all of these things that have zero add to the story.
Yeah. And I don't know why they were going over Mrs. S's house either. What happened was Johnny got into a fight with those three guys. Conrad was kind of the main bully.
Connie.
Yeah. Michelle called him Connie and really ticked him off. And then he was calling her bad names and Johnny was sticking up for her. And Cliff came out and said, "Why are you macing the customers?" Because Michelle sprayed mace in the guy's face. Michelle ends up getting fired. Johnny follows after her and quits. So then there's the whole ride home to take Michelle home that has a bunch of pit stops. And that's kind of what this movie turns into, is Harold and Kumar go to White Castle.
It really is. It really is. That's a fantastic parallel.
Just bunches of stops with crazy stuff happening at each. One of the first side stories, or stops as we'll call them, are the police officers with the perpetrator in their vehicle. So they had fed a perp a donut at one point, which turns him into this farting machine.
Yeah. Yeah, the infected donut just infected him.
Just turns him into this hot mess, and he kicks off the police car door, knocks the two cops out, and they're just sitting there, and he goes running off, and the police are looking for him throughout most of the rest of the movie, trying to find this perp so they don't get in trouble for losing him. The police characters were also kind of interesting and goofy. They love donuts. They had to throw that in there. The cops loving donuts.
Cops loving donut trope. It's a movie about donuts. It had to happen.
Had to. So they're getting their free donuts, and that's actually how they end up with this infected donut. We didn't even talk about how the donuts got infected yet.
So the whole premise in the movie is that these donuts are wreaking havoc on this small town. So Uncle Luther comes into the donut shop to retrieve Johnny's laptop that he had borrowed but had information on it. He gets into a confrontation with the donut shop owner, and a vial flies animated through the air and ends up infecting these donuts with the reanimation serum that he came up with that he was testing on the rats. From here, the donuts get given out and dispersed to different people, gifted to the cops, and one of the first kills of the movie, who is on her cheat day, ends up getting some of these donuts and So it's all left to Uncle Luther. It appears it's left to Uncle Luther to come up with a serum to reverse all of these things that these infected donuts is causing.
And he's not even aware of this donut outbreak because he's down in his lab the whole movie.
He's always in his basement,
and he's kind of just
doing these experiments,
developing the serum on his own and testing it on his lab rat, which he was trying to reanimate a rat. The rat becomes alive again. It bites him. And then he was trying to give it serum to, I don't know. Would you give something that was dead that came back alive a serum to be dead again?
See, it kind of adds to all of these things that happen that feel so important, and then they're not. Because and you kind of do see it in a lot of movies like this, where even in Black Sheep, where these things are these mutant sheeps, and they give them the serum, and somehow they just turn back into like a regular person.
Back to normal.
And same thing with the rat. It was this mutant rat, and he gave it the serum, and it just popped right back into being a regular rat for a short amount of time before something like explodes.
Yes.
But so it's this big buildup, and you're thinking, oh, well, this is the serum. You just went through this whole thing, and you saw all of this, and this is going to be the end all. This is going to be what fixes everything. But just like the brother in the car, just like all of these other things, it's this big buildup, and then it never has any relevance.
Yeah, there's a lot of non-important facts that are thrown at you, which when I watch a movie, I'm always trying to connect the facts.
Yeah.
It left me very confused, entertained. I was entertained by the special effects, but another side quest that threw me off was this whole Flanagan guy that owned what seemed to be another donut shop. And he comes into their shop to demonstrate this new, fresh, gluten-free ingredients, healthy donut. They eat it. Michelle loves it. And then Cliff gives Flanagan this, I think he calls it a douche nut.
Yes.
And he gives him this douche nut donut, which is just a sugar donut. Flanagan takes it home and it's infected. It's a bad donut. But he has it on this tray after he pulls this rock out of his pants and kisses it. Even me describing this out loud right now, I'm like, what in the heck?
There's a bottle of Jergens.
Yes.
On the tray.
Yes.
The whole scene is weird, which he even says when he comes in, he says that he's on a gluten-free vegan paleo diet, which is nonsensical. It actually, that scene, talking about references to other movies, that actually reminded me of Scott Pilgrim when one of the boyfriends comes down and he says he's a level 5 vegan. He doesn't eat anything with a shadow. It just has
awesome.
It just has that amount of like ridiculousness which adds to the ridiculousness of this guy.
Yeah.
But there again, it's the big buildup of who this guy is, and he's got this like magic glowing donut that's so amazing, and she kind of has this almost like orgasmic response to the donut, and then nothing comes from that magic glowing donut. And then, like you said, he takes the douche nut home, and there's the whole tray with like the weird items, and nothing comes from it. There's so much of this movie that builds up, and it's great, and it is great entertainment, but nothing comes from it.
Something's missing. There is often, you're left wondering why this scene was put in. And then after they put so many of those scenes in there, you're just thinking hour and a half. They're shooting for an hour and a half.
Oh, yeah.
They're just going to fluff it with whatever they have, with whatever footage they shot, even if it didn't make linear sense. They're just going to jam it in there.
Yeah, they were having a good time. A critic with the LA Times said this movie was aimed at garbage connoisseurs looking for something dumb to watch with their friends on a weekend night.
Yes.
And that kind of sums it up, really. And even though I think that comment was made in a negative way, I don't take it as negative. I do think that's what it is. But on a positive note, most people that reviewed the movie saw the movie for what it was. It was just ridiculous and was fun to watch. It wasn't supposed to be anything bigger, but ultimately I do think we need to have garbage connoisseur t-shirts available in our apparel shop when we get an apparel shop.
That's genius. We are garbage connoisseurs.
100%.
Because when we get fired from this job, the city of Dayton, Ohio will hire us as trash men.
That's right.
That's where we're headed.
Yep.
You and I, Dan.
Yep.
I thought there was also going to be a hidden weakness the donuts had besides the serum.
Right.
There's that fight where they're in the kitchen of Mrs. S's house and he throws a donut in the microwave, hits 10 seconds, and it blows up. And I was thinking, okay, it might be one of their weaknesses. And I don't know if you've ever microwaved a donut for 8 seconds, which is the recommended Krispy Kreme microwaving time. But they're amazing. I'm just going to put that in there.
They are amazing.
It brings them back to life. It shouldn't kill them.
Yeah.
It gives them a new life.
That was another scene that reminded me of Gremlins, because I believe the mom, I think she puts one of the gremlins into the microwave.
We can talk about the police officers. Those two, let's say they're main characters. They're kind of like an off side story characters. They're almost doing their own thing throughout half the movie. Their names are Rogers and Hammerstein.
Yes.
Which are both named after musicians.
Musical composers. They wrote plays.
Which their most famous play they're known for, from looking at their list of compositions and playwrights, to me would be The Sound of Music.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. One of the cops, which I personally, being a fan of 80s movies, one of the main cops was C. Thomas Howell, he was a bigger 80s heartthrob kind of character. He was one of the main cops. He was in E.T., Outsiders, and Red Dawn, which, if you haven't seen that, is amazing movie in itself.
The director, Scott Wheeler,
he directed this movie and he directed Avalanche Shark, as well as he was the effects guy.
Okay.
In the effects, one of the things, going back to my love for practical effects, they actually built an 8-foot by 8-foot miniature version of the donut shop, and that's what they blew up. But the guy who did that was the same guy who blew up the White House in Independence Day. That's kind of a big deal. That's kind of a big jump, going from blowing up a donut shop in Attack of the Killer Donuts to blowing up the White House in Independence Day.
Yeah, and actually it was Independence Day came out first, so I don't know if that's a resume boost at that point in your life.
Right. Well, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this movie wasn't very well known. We found it through a recommendation on your Netflix, or do you remember where it recommended it to you?
I believe it was Tubi. I believe it came up as a Tubi recommendation. This was one of the movies several years ago that really kind of got me into the amount of movies that I binge. I started getting up at 7:00 every Saturday and Sunday morning just so I could have time on my own to watch these movies, which I know my family isn't going to enjoy this sort of movie. But I actually got that idea from Rob Zombie, who will wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to watch horror movies before his day starts because he has such a crazy day. That's kind of where I got the idea to do it. Was I'm just going to wake up a couple hours early before my family just so I can watch a few of these movies. And this was one of the very first movies that spawned that whole thing for me.
That's cool. The boss fight of this movie,
yes,
is when they all suit up with their weapons. There's a super soaker, there's a hockey stick, there's a serum syringe on a stick, and then there's a tennis racket.
Yes, I always love a good pre-combat montage.
They did that good.
Absolutely, they did it very well.
And they were heading into the Lion's Den, which is the donut shop, where these donuts have somehow taken control of hundreds of these donuts at this point, flying around. And the four, main characters, Michelle, Johnny, Uncle Luther, and Howard, go in there to battle these donuts. The police officers show up. That random extra guy is already in there. He's fighting also. And At some point, Michelle and Johnny lock themselves into this other side room. The police officers are out there. They get killed by the donuts. Uncle Luther escapes. Does he die?
Uncle Luther just stopped being present. I don't know. I don't remember him like exiting. I don't remember him dying.
Yeah, I don't either.
I just feel like he just stopped being present.
Johnny and Michelle go into this room to escape the donuts, and while they're locked in there, Johnny is having this breakdown of his life. Veronica doesn't love him. He's just going through all these emotions. He lost his job. He quit his job that day. And then that's kind of where the love story of Michelle and Johnny start. And she kisses him to snap him back into reality. And they come up with this master plan to let the gas leak out of the gas pipe and light it and run out of there, out of some emergency exit or some tunnel exit. There were 2 fridges in that room. That would have been my strategy.
Yes.
I thought that's what they were going to do. They're sitting there in front of the fridges talking, what are we going to do? How are we going to escape this blast? And I'm like, yes, they're going to use the fridges. That's why they're saying this right in front of the fridge. They don't.
Nope.
They, again, expect the unexpected with this movie. They blow up the whole donut shop. Their buddy Howard gets sent to the hospital, which later they reveal that he loses a testicle. Again, these extra facts that are like, what the heck?
I didn't know if that was going to be set up to the fact that Howard was sleeping with Johnny's mom. But there again, never became relevant.
Yeah. There's some references to other movies in this film also. When they describe Howard's parents, Johnny says going to Howard's house is like a museum because you can't touch anything.
Yes.
Which was a reference from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I thought that was kind of a neat little, it kind of hidden in there.
It was a nice little wink. Yeah, there was a lot of nice little winks, I think, throughout the entire movie.
Cliff, I think, also says, "You filthy animals," at some point.
Yeah.
Which is from, I know it from Home Alone, but I think it's from another film that is in a Home Alone.
That movie's actually not real. I looked up, I wanted to see it. It's called Angels with Even Filthier Souls. And I actually looked it up, and that scene was shot just for the videotape on Home Alone.
There were a few other continuity issues of the movie. When the perp kicks the back door off of the police car,
yes,
it leaves the word ICE, like of police, ICE, on the front door, or I guess it would be the passenger side front door. Later in the movie, the door's still off, but they added an L and it said lice. And you can see it at the part where all the donuts are leaving Mrs. S's house and packing up into the police car. And it says lice on the police car, which is weird that must have been photoshopped or edited in later.
I would guess, because that's a lot of work to have 2 cars without a door or wrapping 2 vehicles. Seems like a lot of extra work to have that.
The donuts could also drive the vehicle.
Oh, I love that. One donut on the pedals and one donut driving with its mouth. No sense. No sense at all.
Like on Black Sheep, where the sheep is driving the vehicle.
Right. Well, a sheep could at least reach the pedals.
I mean, that is realistic. Those donuts would have to be speaking to one another through some sort of telekinesis, because they seem to all in unison work together. The part where Howard, Michelle, and Johnny come into Mrs. S's house and the donuts are all lined up there, and there's the standoff moment where the humans versus the donuts, what's going to happen next? The humans kind of shift to the left, the donuts also shift to the left. So they were in unison working together as this mega donut brain powered.
It kind of reminds me of birds. Like birds do that. Like, there'll be 30 birds and they'll all just like leave a power line at the same time and swarm up into the air and then like all land in a tree at the same time.
Yes.
They kind of have that weird pack mentality.
Another one of the kills that I really liked, and this is probably my favorite part of the movie, is when Bobby and Veronica are in that Trans Am or Camaro. They all look the same from like the mid 80s, which they always make the bad guy or the a-hole guy drive a Camaro.
Every time.
Yep. So he's in the car. He rolls down his window when the donut police car shows up. and it was like a donut twist, maybe.
Yes.
Goes straight to his dome, straight to his forehead, penetrates in like a tremors worm, and just he's dead. That was my favorite part of the movie. Definitely, 100%.
And it just goes to the different strengths of the donuts.
Yeah, there was different donuts for different tasks.
Yes.
Almost like ants. Like you have your worker ant, you have your army ants.
Yeah.
Like you have different levels of donut ants. What was your favorite part, Dan? What would you say?
I would say throughout the movie, I thought my favorite part was Miss Scullery's encounter at home. It was very weird, but it's the very first scene when things just go sideways. Like bad. Like things are hinted of going sideways, but that's the scene where it just like, here we go. But after watching the movie through, I would say my favorite scene was probably the deep fryer, just because of the nostalgia of linking it to Gremlins. And I love Gremlins so much. Gremlins is such a great movie. And just, yeah, like the chirping noises they were making, the shooting out of the fryer, it was such a wink to Gremlins that I really loved that scene.
It was fun when they just kept eject.
Yeah, and they just kept like shooting out.
Popping them out, like multiplying.
Yeah.
By the dozen. The message for me that this movie portrays is what you're looking for is always in front of you already. So with the love story, at least, not with the donuts, not with the craziness, but with this Michelle and Johnny love story, he's searching for love. He's searching for something special in life. Michelle's been there the whole time for him. When he finally recognizes it, he takes advantage of it and kind of seizes the moment. And that's how the movie ends, with them in the bed, kind of having that conversation of what they are now in a relationship. And it ends pretty chill, except leading up to a potential sequel.
See, there's always that one little cliffhanger, the puppy bang on the hill, or there's always that little shark egg hatching thing that has to end.
Yep.
So to you, what would a sequel look like for this?
Well, assuming that that's the only donut left that knocks on the window at the end. I guess it doesn't knock on the window. It hops into the window and looks into the window. It has a bite taken out of it. So we don't know how long it has to live.
See, but is that the only donut? Because they blow up the donut shop, but there was donuts all over town wreaking havoc. They only blew up the donut shop. They never at any point confronted the fact that these donuts are all over town killing people.
The only few dozen that we know existed were Mrs. S.
Yes.
Were the Conrad and the bullies, were the police officers. And that might be it, because when Flanagan comes in and brags about already selling 3 dozen worth of donuts, Cliff, the owner of the donut shop, acts like that's a huge amount.
Yeah.
Like, what? You sold 3 dozen? So maybe there weren't that many donuts created or sold that left the donut shop.
Well, that's at least 36.
Yeah, but they stayed in like their little, I guess you're right. I thought they'd stay in their little clusters. Like Mrs. S, when she goes home to have her cheat day, another weird sexually charged scene is her in her lingerie dancing around these donuts.
Rubbing herself up.
What in the heck? Like, again, this is another weird scene. And the fake cat Whiskers McFur, that was one of the worst looking fake pets I've ever seen.
That was strange.
Why not just use a real cat? That cat had no influence on the scene. It was just sitting there. You could have just used a real cat, but they used this crazy looking fake cat, almost purposely done, where you think maybe that lady owns this animatronic cat that she believes is alive.
I think it purrs, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's weird.
It's so weird.
So that's one of the dozen is there. The other one's Conrad and his buddies eating them out by their car.
Yeah.
When Conrad gets his hand bit off.
That was beautiful.
That was great. It was very well done. And you could see like the stump or the fake hand on the fake hand on top of the real hand.
You always have that extra really long forearm.
Yeah, they did well with that scene where those guys are eating the donuts. The one guy eats the donuts and then craps himself. That's another theme. After you eat these donuts, you basically crap yourself to death.
Yes.
The different strengths of the donuts too. Like some of the donuts weren't attacking aggressively, but then some of them were like taking off Conrad's arm.
Yeah, a lot of them were just like covering somebody and just basically like nibbling.
Yeah, it was interesting.
And then the one donut, just completely snaps off his entire hand.
Like the super strengths of the donuts. So that was the second dozen, is Conrad with his buddies. And then the third dozen were the police officers in their vehicle, which the one guy, the perp, ate one and then crapped himself to death. And the other ones, I think, escaped, but they didn't really show where they went.
You never saw any of the other dozen.
So wrapping this all back to your question of a sequel, I think there's still some wild donuts out there. Definitely, possibly, they made a second Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
They did.
So if they're holding true to that, I think we could potentially see a sequel.
Yeah, and when the cops went back to Miss Scollery's house, her house was full of donuts.
Yeah.
So I don't know if were they multiplying, because originally she just had a dozen donuts, but now like her house was completely full of donuts.
That's a good valid point. They were multiplying themselves out of the fryer because nobody was putting more in, nobody was making more mix, nobody was baking more donuts.
Yeah.
They were just making themselves at that point.
So I think there's plenty of room.
There could be.
I don't know what the plot would be.
I don't know what the plot of this one was.
I'm not sure what the plot of this movie was, and I actually watched it several times. So I have no idea what the plot of a sequel would be.
They'll wrap up all the loose ends. It'll just be an hour and a half of that.
Attack of the Killer Donuts 2 Loose Ends. It was the winner of Best Film at the Florida SuperCon and Best Film at the Melbourne Independent Filmmakers Festival.
That's good that it got some awards.
Yeah, so it's gotten a little bit of recognition in the independent film world.
Yeah, I enjoyed it overall. As rough as I've been on it, kind of making fun of it, I think that's what it's there for.
Right, the movie did what the movie was there to do. And it was just entertaining. It wasn't a Gone with the Wind. It wasn't this over-the-top masterpiece of any kind. It was there to entertain you, and I think it did it.
All right, so now we're going to review this movie. Going to be out of a best score of 40 points. Killer Bunny score coming up. Acting and characters, what is your opinion of that in this movie?
I thought for what the movie was, I thought the acting was fairly well done. I mean, you can't at any point say that any of this was believable, but the acting didn't feel scripted. It didn't feel that it was being forced or uncomfortable. So the acting I thought was pretty good for, again, considering the ridiculousness of this movie. I'm probably going to go with an 8.5.
8.5?
I mean, I really, like I said, at no point did I feel that anything was being rehearsed or scripted or nobody was being fed lines. Everything was acted naturally, I felt.
In your connection to the characters, you felt like you were connected with them? Did you care about any of them dying? I'm challenging you on this 8.5 here.
Okay, I didn't really.
Were there any deaths that almost made you cry?
I didn't consider my connection to the characters.
Okay.
I didn't consider connection to the characters. There was no character that I loved or I felt connected enough to the point where when they died, I was disappointed or I was hurt or I was emotionally moved in any way that, oh, I can't believe so-and-so died. So I don't see, I'm second guessing myself now because
it's all good.
I enjoyed the characters. I didn't really have any connection to the characters.
You're going to have to average those scores out because I'm going to say a 5.
I was going to say 5.
Okay.
After considering my connection to the characters, I'm probably going to say a 5 because none of the characters, even the main characters who I enjoyed, nothing was done to make me feel connected to anyone. I was never, like I said, I was never hurt that anyone died, but also I was never relieved that anyone lived.
That's a good way to look at it. That's how you should live your life.
That's how you should live your life.
All right, five it is on that one. The production value for me, good, bad special effects. It's the same thing we've said before on some of these movies where it's done so badly that it actually is entertaining, well taken, and made me laugh. There was a lot of parts in this movie that I giggled at, especially when the influx of donuts, like you were saying, came out of the deep fryer, when the influx of donuts were just flying around the rooms. There's one scene where the donuts are kind of bouncing down the highway street. Special effects were cheesy. Cinematography was okay. Didn't have that much dynamic scenes to it. Very simple shot scenes. I would probably say 7.
And I completely agree with the cheesiness really added to the feel of the entire movie. It added to all of these elements that kept coming up that was completely unrelated. It was almost like a lot of detachment, but I don't know. I think I would give production maybe a 6.
All right, fair. Dan, how original do you think this movie was?
For what it was an original twist on something that's already been done. It had heavy influences of obviously Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and I felt Reanimator. It was done different. It wasn't just a straight cop off of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which I appreciated. It actually gave more, believe it or not, gave more story, more origin story to why this is happening with using the Reanimator sort of, I guess, backstory. But as far as overall originality, I don't know, maybe 7.
Yeah, I would say 7. You're mixing Killer Tomatoes with Reanimator, trying to make it your own thing, throwing in a love story. It had some dynamics to it.
It did. I
think 7's fair.
Scott, how would you rate the impactfulness and how memorable this movie is? And would you recommend it to a friend?
Well, you recommended this to me, so that makes us friends.
Yeah.
From this question.
I believe this is the second movie that I recommended.
It is. And I've liked both so far. I would definitely recommend this to a friend if they like the cheesiness, the goofiness. What would you call it? Movie trash?
Movie trash. It is garbage connoisseur.
So if you're a garbage connoisseur, this is the right kind of movie for you. Throw it on a Friday night, enjoy an hour and a half of entertainment, and you're done. You're not going to think of this next week unless somebody comes up to you and says, name one of the weirdest movies you've ever seen. And this would be on it.
This is on the list.
This is on the list. So I would say a 9. It's high, but it deserves it.
No, see, I have to agree with a 9 because it's definitely an impactful movie. And I'm going to recommend this movie before I'm going to recommend Attack of the Killer Tomatoes or Reanimator.
Good point. I don't think I would ever recommend Attack of the Killer Tomatoes to anyone.
It's a movie that people need to have seen because it exists. It's almost on the level of the Airplane movies, where it's so ridiculous and goofy. The Airplane movies was better written and better acted, but it's on that level of where it's just kooky. And this actually had a storyline and it had a love interest. So I would definitely rate this higher.
9's a good score.
27.5 out of 40.
Thank you for joining us this week. As always, we appreciate your time for listening to us. If you have any recommendations, please email us, reach out to us on Facebook, or any other method you can to get a hold of us. Next week, we'll be talking about Street Trash. It's a movie from 1987, directed by J. Michael Muro. We look forward to reviewing it with you. I'm Scott Cornell.
And I'm Dan Lawson. This has been a Scary Movie Review. Until next time,
Stay horrible.